He had said it without flinching, without hesitation, in front of the entire court, surrounded by candlelight and the whispered judgments of England's most powerful families. The Duke of Ashford looked into her eyes and declared that love was a weakness he would never permit himself. And yet, his hand had found hers beneath the long banquet table, hidden from view, invisible to the world, and he held it so tightly that his knuckles turned white. No one in that glittering ballroom saw it. No one knew that the coldest man in all of Regency England was gripping the hand of a woman he had sworn to despise, as though releasing her would cost him everything he had left. But Miss Elara Voss knew. She felt every tremor of tension moving through his fingers. She felt the contradiction of him, the man who spoke of love as though it were a disease, while his body betrayed every word he had just uttered. The question was not whether the Duke of Ashford was in love with her. The question was whether he would destroy them both before he allowed himself to admit it. Elara Voss had arrived at Thornhaven, the ancestral estate of the Ashford dukedom, not as a guest, not as a noblewoman, and certainly not as anyone's romantic interest. She had arrived as a paid companion to the Duke's ailing aunt, Lady Cecilia, a warm and wickedly sharp woman who had summoned Elara from Bath on the recommendation of a mutual acquaintance. Thornhaven was magnificent in the way that all things born from centuries of power are magnificent, cold at its core, beautiful on its surface, and quietly suffocating to anyone who looked too closely. The Duke himself, Lord Edmund Ashford, was exactly the kind of man that Bath drawing-rooms whispered about with equal parts fascination and fear. Tall, dark-eyed, devastatingly composed, a man who had emerged from a brief and reportedly catastrophic betrothal 3 years prior, and had since rebuilt himself into something entirely unreachable. He did not court, he did not dance unless forced, he did not smile unless the smile meant nothing. When Elara first encountered him in the East Corridor, she was carrying a stack of Lady Cecilia's correspondence, and he was walking with the focused silence of a man who treated his own home as a battlefield. He had glanced at her only once and said nothing at all, which was precisely how she knew he had noticed her. The weeks that followed moved in the slow, charged rhythm of an approaching storm. Lady Cecilia, cunning even in her illness, had a talent for placing Elara and Edmund in the same room at precisely the wrong moments, or perhaps the right ones. The library, at midnight, where Elara had been reading aloud, and Edmund had appeared in the doorway as though drawn by something he refused to name. The garden in the grey light of early morning, where they had walked for 20 minutes without speaking, and somehow said more than most people said in a lifetime. He was not unkind to her. That surprised her most. She had prepared herself for cold indifference or aristocratic dismissal. Instead, Edmund Ashford was something far more dangerous. He was careful with her, thoughtful in a way he clearly resented in himself. "You read philosophy," he said one evening, noting the volume in her hands. "I read everything," she replied. "Does that offend you?" He had looked at her for a long moment. "It unsettles me," he said, "which is worse." But before the truth of what grew between those walls could be spoken aloud, something arrived that threatened to silence it forever. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the Duke's Lost Letters, because every subscription helps this channel continue bringing you these unforgettable Regency stories of secrets, heartbreak, and forbidden love. And now, back to Thornhaven, where a letter had just arrived that would change everything. The letter bore no return address, but Edmund recognized the handwriting instantly. It was from Sir Harlan Voss, Elara's estranged father, and it had been addressed to Edmund's solicitor, and it had been delivered to Thornhaven by mistake, or perhaps not by mistake at all. Edmund should not have read it. He read every word.
What it contained was not a message of fatherly concern. It was an arrangement, a financial arrangement, one that made Edmund's blood run cold with a fury he had not felt in years. Sir Harlan Voss, drowning in debt and desperation, had written to propose that his daughter Elara be formally placed within the Ashford household, with the intention of securing the Duke's romantic interest and ultimately his fortune. Elara, according to her father's letter, was to be a trap. Edmund folded the letter. He set it down on his desk, and for 3 days he said nothing. He watched her differently now, searching for the performance, waiting for the calculation behind her eyes. But what he found instead was worse. Nothing at all. No performance, no scheme, only Elara, exactly as she had always been, reading to Lady Cecilia, laughing softly at something the old woman said, looking out at the gardens with an expression of quiet longing that no woman paid to deceive would ever allow herself. She did not know. That was the unbearable truth. Sir Harlan had sold his daughter's future without ever telling her.
The confrontation, when it came, was not what Edmund planned. He had intended coldness, distance, a formal and dignified dismissal that would protect them both. Instead, at the Ashford winter banquet, surrounded by every notable family in the county, Sir Harlan Voss appeared uninvited, arriving with a confident smile and the air of a man who believed he had already won. He greeted Edmund with false warmth, looked at Elara with possessive satisfaction, and began quietly whispering to Lord Pemberton that an understanding between the Voss family and the Ashford dukedom was all but settled. Elara heard it across the room. Her face went white. She turned to Edmund and found him already watching her, his expression stripped of every careful mask he had ever worn. "You knew," she whispered when she reached him. It was not an accusation, it was a wound. "I knew what your father wrote," he said quietly. "I did not believe it was what you intended." "I had no intention," she said, her voice breaking at its edges. I only ever—" She stopped. She pressed her lips together. "I should leave. I will leave tonight." "You will not," Edmund said, and something in his voice made the room feel very far away. He reached out, in full view of the assembled company, in front of every judgmental eye in the county, and took her hand. "Love is a weakness." He had said it less than an hour ago, standing before Lord Pemberton with his usual granite composure, dismissing the very suggestion of romantic sentiment as beneath him. Now he stood holding her hand so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The room had gone very still. Miss Voss came to Thornhaven as a companion to my aunt. She remained because she is the most honest person I have encountered in 10 years of navigating a world full of people who are not. He did not look away from Elara. Her father's schemes are his own. They do not belong to her. Sir Harlan sputtered. Lord Pemberton raised an eyebrow. Lady Cecilia, seated near the fire in her chair, smiled like a woman who had orchestrated every moment of this vabalcant. "Your Grace," Elara said softly, "you do not have to. I am aware. I have spent the better part of 3 months convincing myself that I did not have to feel anything at all." His thumb traced gently across the back of her hand. "I was wrong about that. I find I am wrong about a great number of things when you are involved." They were married in the small chapel at Thornhaven on a morning when frost still clung to the window glass and the light fell pale and soft through ancient stone. Lady Cecilia wept the refined tears of a woman who had wanted exactly this outcome and had worked patiently toward it for months. There were no grand declarations, no orchestrated performance for society's approval, only Edmund standing at the altar with the focused stillness of a man who had made peace with something enormous, and Elara walking to him with steady steps and eyes that held no uncertainty. He had written her a letter, one single letter, slipped beneath her door on the eve of their wedding. She would keep it for the rest of her life. It read in full,
I said love was a weakness. I have since revised my opinion. It appears to be the only thing I have not been strong enough to live without. Forgive me for taking so long to say it plainly. I love you. That is all. E. She tucked it against her heart on their wedding morning, and she did not let go. Some people spend their entire lives running from the very thing that could save them, building walls from past pain, writing rules to keep feeling at a safe and manageable distance. The Duke of Ashford had been such a man, cold by design, armored by choice. But love, as it turns out, does not ask permission to enter. It slips through the cracks in the stonework. It finds you in libraries at midnight, and frost-covered gardens, and ballrooms full of people who will never understand what is passing between two people who have chosen each other quietly, stubbornly, and completely. His knuckles had turned white. That was the moment she had known, and she had held on just as tightly. If this story of stubborn love, hidden letters, and two people who found each other despite every obstacle moved something in you, subscribe to the Duke's Lost Letters and share it with someone who believes in the kind of love worth fighting for. Until next time, some love stories are too powerful to remain buried.